Hey YouTube, Numbers Post 1975. This is a video response to Dragon with the PS. He's boxed on my channel. I'll link him in the doohickey below as well. I'll also link his video there. It's episode 9 of Monotonous Mondays. Now, he's asking, well, he's saying basically, games don't kill people. Ignorance kills people. Because, you know, there's a lot of, and it's the eternal debate, isn't it? There's a lot of crap out there in society where people blame violent acts and violent crimes on video games, you know. And, he makes a lot of really good points where he's pretty much saying that the responsibility for this, you know, is not the games. It lies at the feet of the parents for, you know, lack of installing moral conscience into their children, or policing their gaming or movie habits, you know, not letting them have access to things that are aimed at adults when they're, you know, 6, 7, 8 years old. Now, I'm not going to return what he said because I got a different topic I want to talk about, but basically, there will always be people out there, I've kind of mentioned this in a prior video, there will always be people out there at some point in their life, they're going to wig out and they're going to do the horrible nasty act that they did. It's not because of games, it's not because of movies, it's not because of comics, you know, it's because it was predetermined, you know, they were wired that way. They were going to do it from day one, it was going to happen, and whatever triggered it was just a trigger mechanism. You know, a million other people could have used the same thing, watched the same movie, played the same game, whatever, and they were fine. So my point with that is, this person was going to go batshit crazy. I've mentioned this before, as I said, but it's the nature of society. There are people out there who are crazy, basically. They're going to commit these horrible acts. Video games are just a scapegoat, a convenient excuse in the long line of excuses that the powers that be, or those in charge, you know, politicians, etc., will basically use to cover up or hide the fact of their inability to deal with certain issues in society. You know, there will always be crime, whether it's for lack of funding, lack of police, failing to care for people who have mental illness, etc. There will always be these things that happened, and for whatever reason, they're politicians, they're lying bastards. Rather than accept that this may have happened on their watch, they'll just go, video game's fault, that was video game's fault, that wasn't anything to do with us. And the thing is, scaremongering like this, there's too many people out there who will just jump straight on the bandwagon and just go, for whatever reason, they want to believe that or accept that that is the reason that crime, murder, robbery, whatever happens, you know, that it's, I don't know, maybe they can accept, well, I've accepted, you know, that quite a lot of the time, the world isn't necessarily a sugar-coated place, you know. There are lots of times where it's a shithole and these horrible things happen, and some people like to bury their head in the sand or stick it so far up their own ass and just live in denial. You know, it isn't nice that these things happen, it isn't nice that people get murdered, etc. But if you want to live in society, you have to accept that. To simply close your eyes and just blame it on video games is just, you're living in a dream world. And it's not right, because why should video games, you know, suffer the brunt of politicians' failures or the police failures to deal with these problems, you know? As Dragon said also, you know, quite a lot of the blame lies at the feet of the parents. But once again, it's their child or whatever who does one of these horrific things, they'll just go video games. Because for them it's easier to blame something else and accept their failings as a parent. The sad thing here is, or the irony here is, that this blame culture has been around for like forever, you know, going back decades and decades, which in itself proves that crime has always been around, you know, it's always been around and it's always going to be there, so people are always trying to find a way to pin it on something else rather than, I don't know, deal with it. I mean, currently now, in the 2000s and the 90s, it was video games, wasn't it? Maybe this was a direct result that technology got better and they could portray, you know, more realistic looking games. I don't know, but that, you know, let's be honest, the 90s and 2000s, it's video games that are the fault of every single bad thing that happens. Then in the 80s, it was video nasties, wasn't it? I lost count of the number of movies they're available now, but they were banned in the 80s, like Driller Killer, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, because people were so scared that people would replicate these crimes. Well, they never did. And then in the 70s, oh, my personal favourite, nunchucks. Nunchucks were edited out of every single movie in this country, including all the Bruce Lee ones, which really pissed me off, because as a collector I had to import, even way back in the day, I was import boy, I had to import all my Bruce Lee movies from Hong Kong, because I wanted to see the nunchucks. But the powers that be in the 70s in this country were so scared that they thought every kid had a gang, you know, they'll carry nunchucks, there'll be whole gangs of feral thugs just wielding nunchucks, which in itself makes me laugh, because, you know, nunchucks, you've got to be pretty proficient in their use, you know, to hurt someone with them. But then the other irony of that is, what, so they cut every single nunchuck out of a movie because they were so scared of kids carrying them in gangs, yet they left all the knife scenes and the stabbing scenes in movies. What's easier to get? What's easier to use? It's a knife. So that in itself was kind of, it didn't really make sense. Then obviously in the 60s it was rock and roll. Everything was rock and roll's fault. You know, oh, it's going to make kids go mental, it's going to destroy whole generations. It never did. And then in the 50s, and it was horror comics. Seriously, in the 50s, people thought horror comics were going to corrupt the minds of youth, and everything would just hit the fan. I guess there's two constants you can draw here, you know. Decades and decades, people have always found something else to blame for the failings of society, you know, or a form of media or entertainment to blame for the failings of society. And the other constant is there will always be people who find it far easier to blame something rather than accept that these things happen anyway, or come to terms with it, or get to grips with the problem. And the problem is not the media they're blaming, because censorship is not an answer for anything. So I'm going on and on again. Pretty much do I think video games are the reason people kill people? No. I think that sadly that's an inevitable part of life. But people will always, you know, now that technology is so good and it's just getting better and better, and the next gen systems are around the corner, you know, not graphically and visually, they're going to be, you know, at some point they're going to be life realistic, I assume. It means that pretty much from this point onwards, video games are going to be blamed for every crime, and I think that's really sad. You know, like I said, the world's a great place, but parts of it are pretty shitty, and sorry, that's life. Deal with it. It's not the fault of video games. I'll see you later.